What's happening, everybody?
I like to think anybody can grow. It really isn't that hard at all.
In-Tents
All the
Genetix.
followers on Facebook, everybody who's been participating in the giveaways, it really does mean the world to me.
We're here with the one and only In-Tents Genetix, and this is our first episode doing this show, so we wanted to kind of start it off with some personal experience, so you guys can get to know In-Tents himself a little bit. So I just wanted to kick it off by asking you just a simple question: your first grow. Since it's the first episode, let's talk about the first grow, or at least the first couple grows leading up to the first successful grow, and what your experience was like with that.
Yeah, absolutely. What's happening, everybody? Good to be here. Good to be doing this. Excited about it. First grow. Oh man. Yeah, there was a lot to go on with that. So, just like most people, you start off pretty young. I think I started popping seeds when I was, man, had to be freshman year of high school. So I don't know, where does that place me? Um, Man,
Early, probably
I don't know,
14,
15,
15.
14, 15, something like that. Early on, it was all about, being broke and trying to find a way to supplement my habit without having to pay for it. And growing medical plants was a great option. So I took a bucket, filled it with some soil from my grandma's garden, threw it in the corner of the garage we would hang out in, and I threw just like a basic shop light over it. And I didn't do anything. I just threw some seeds in the bucket, and that was my first ever attempt at growing. And the plants sprouted. They actually sprouted, but then they died immediately because there was no airflow. It was just a million degrees because the light was just like sitting above the bucket. So it fried them. So I didn't quite get to a harvest my first go round.
Lucky you didn't
My
set that
second
garage on fire.
I'm very lucky I didn't burn the whole thing down. That is for sure. Uh, I think my dad found it, and he said exactly the same thing. So, yeah, did not end up growing in the garage the first go around. The second go around wasn't even my own doing. Somebody that was just hanging out at the garage threw some seeds in one of my grandma's gardening pots, and some some plants came up, and they were crushing it. And at the time it wasn't okay, so we were all nervous about it. So my sister ended up getting rid of them at the time, and we moved on from there. But the infatuation definitely started, and I was ready to grow. So later on down the road, not much longer after that, you got a hold of me and you said that you had a buddy at school who was able to uh, provide us with a plant to attempt. So something about his house was starting to smell too much, and his mom was worried about it, and he gave us the two smaller plants, and he kept one of the larger ones that ended up being male. But we ended up getting two of his females actually, and my mom went and helped me pick them up and bring them home, and we set them up in the window and put a fish tank light over them. And I literally would unplug it to keep the time going. Like, that's how broke we were. We couldn't go get
Yeah,
a freaking mechanical timer, you
yeah,
know?
the best was it
But
was in the window in your brother's room, so you didn't have to deal with
oh yeah,
it. He did.
didn't have to deal with it at all. Yeah, and he had to deal with me more like it because I was just all about it. I was all about it from the jump. Like, I couldn't get enough of them. I would call my mom and tell her unplug the lights when I was out and I wasn't home
To,
yet. I'm like,
yeah,
it's gonna mess them up.
describe that setup a
And
little bit more. Didn't you like use aluminum foil or?
Oh, okay. So the original setup was literally the pots the kid gave us them in. We didn't transplant them or anything. And then they were sitting on a desk in the window with tomato cages. And we like wrapped tin foil all around the tomato cages to try to reflect some of the sunlight. And then we just put an aquarium tank light that we found. It wasn't even like a real fluorescent light. It's like for an aquarium. And we threw that above it for whatever reason to help keep the light cycle. And
At that time, the only knowledge that was really available was on the forums. Like we would check out overgrow.com, and that's where I really started to learn about the plant from other people's experiences. And a lot of stuff was from the Netherlands and that kind of thing. And I was able to kind of learn a little bit from them. And it was mostly just that. It was really just overgrow for the forums. And that's how I learned about the light cycle and that kind of thing early on. Even then, with the first grow, I was already that into it where I was like ready to look up every little thing about it, because you know consuming isn't exactly addictive, but growing the medical plants is definitely addictive. So, yeah, at least it was for me, and still is, still is. And then we got to the end of a harvest with that. We actually did end up harvesting that time, and then as kids who are broke and wanting to, you know, get where we needed to go, we cut them down immediately, tossed them in a brown paper bag, hit them with a blow dryer to dry them out the same day, you know, and and yeah, we then consumed it, and I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that's how easy it was. And then from there, things definitely changed. We all started getting into it. Yourself, myself, a few other buddies of ours, and then we started getting serious and ordering seeds from Amsterdam and stuff. So yeah, it got a
Yeah,
lot of fun.
I
It
think
started becoming a lot of fun.
I think we very quickly learned our biggest obstacle in this whole thing was just going to be ourselves, patience.
Absolutely, absolutely. Time put in, and when the jars are empty, it's a little different than when the jars are full. And back then the jars were always empty. So
You're so knowledgeable. You're like an encyclopedia with this stuff, and I think the goal here is to spread that knowledge to some of your fans, your followers, your supporters. Tell us a little bit about what you aim to do here.
yeah, I think the goal is really to just kind of spread how I have been, all the knowledge I've kind of gained through the years, through experience and through really jumping in on, I'll be honest, YouTube has been my university when it comes to this. Um, I've definitely I definitely watch a lot of content creators, and I've seen a lot of different, styles of growing and how different people are doing it. And I've kind of narrowed it down to where I think this is probably the easiest way for a beginning grower to really to shine, to really just crush it, with little effort. And yeah, I think that's the way to do it. I think that's the way to do it, is just kind of show, or not necessarily show, but share my experience of where I've come and how I've started growing and then how I do it, and I try to share that on the Facebook as well with pictures and descriptions, but it's different when you can hear somebody talking to you. It doesn't, not everybody likes to read, and I get that. And it's nice to just kind of have another way to communicate to the people.
From my perspective, I feel like there's, when getting started, what is like the minimum type of equipment you need? And I think there's really five categories here that people need to consider when getting started. Um, the tents or the grow space itself, the lights, the airflow, the temperature control, and choosing between soil and hydro. So, why don't you let us know a little bit what, maybe what kind of setup you use as far as tents, lights, airflow, temperature control, and soil or hydro?
Yeah, absolutely. So my big one is I like the Gorilla Grow tents. They're a really solid tent. So for my space, I run in 2x4 tents, and I also run in a 4x4 space. And I have a perpetual grow, so I use both spaces constantly. And it's nice to be able to have both spaces for multiple different reasons. For lighting, I use Mars Hydro currently for the 2x4. I have a SP 3000. It's a 300-watt light to cover the space. I feel like 300 watts is a good amount of light for 2x4 worth of space. And in the 4x4, I run the Science LED. It's a Raging Kush 2.0. It's a really nice light. I'm able to spectrum control it and everything. And my setup is probably more on the higher end, where it's more the hobbyist grower, not necessarily the beginner grower, somebody who's been really into it and wants to really dive in and play with all the tools that are available. As far as exhaust systems go, I'm a big proponent of the AC Infinity exhaust systems. I think they're fantastic. I've been all about them since they first hit the market. It's nice to be able to set it and forget it. It comes with a nice temperature probe that you can just set at canopy height and then set your parameters, and the exhaust fan kicks on and off. And it's able to really control the environment of the tent remotely without you needing to be there and check on it or anything like that. So it's very nice. It's been a game changer for sure. Before that, back in the day, I was running an exhaust fan, from Home Depot, and always running it and trying to, balance temperature with how much it's exhausting. And it wasn't always as easy as it is now. Things have definitely changed. So it's much easier these days for an entry level grower to come in, set it and forget it. And that's really nice. I also use fans just to keep the airflow moving within the tent. You can get cheap fans on Amazon. I use the Amazon brand ones. I use the Hurricane ones. I use Secret Garden ones. I haven't tried the new AC Infinity oscillating ones. They look decent, but I haven't sprung for those just yet. Um, really like having airflow above and below the canopy at all times to prevent chances of mold. Uh, Soil or hydro? I've done both. I really have. I started with soil and I saw the benefits in hydro and I switched to DWC, and the benefits were definitely there. But I always liked the way the flavor came from the soil and the earthiness and that kind of thing. I really appreciated the soil for that. So I've gone back to organic style of growing with soil and dry amendments and a few other little additives here and there, but for the most part, it's just soil and Gaia Green for the most part is the main base of it. Use fabric pots, really enjoy those for final containers. They work really well. I have a nice big flood tray on the bottom of the tent that covers the entire floor to catch any runoff because I use a drip system in order to feed the plants. And
Um,
that's just,
describe
I set
describe
that
the
up
drip
myself.
system. Describe that drip system to us a little bit.
So the watering system's really fantastic. You can get in there and hand water. I do hand water quite a bit with just a 2 gallon pot, just watering it in by hand, which is really great. But when you're going on vacation and you're not there and nobody treats your plants like you do, and you want to make sure it's done right, you're going to want to set up a reservoir with a drip system, and then you could go away for a week or two on vacation and not worry about it. So when running multiple plants, it's nice to be able to just do that so you're not in there hand watering every one. So the way I set it up is I have a 32-gallon garbage can, or like a food grade Rubbermaid type garbage can, and I fill that up. And I use a pump pump a 1/2 inch trunk line into the tent that's capped off on the end, and within the trunk line there's not drip emitters. There's a connection manifold. Then it splits off into 4 1/4 inch lines that go into a drip emitter that goes into each pot. And the drip emitters shoot the water in a 360. So I put it right in the center of the pot, and it pretty much gets a good coverage. And as long as you water it enough, it should be just fine. And those work great. I do check on them to make sure that they don't clog and make sure that water is always flowing when I do go to water with them. But yeah, the drip system works great. It works really good. Drip lines are fairly simple. I use all black polyurethane in order to prevent mold from or algae from forming in the lines so that you don't run into any issues there. And then I think that's about it as far as the setup. I mean,
Yeah, that was one
fan
of my
size would be the only
that
thing.
that was one of my
So
early
the
mistakes. Using clear lines, just didn't even think about it. And yeah, they definitely get green. If that light is able to hit where the water is, if there's any sort of contact between the water and the light, it will develop algae. So that's very important. I feel to use those black lines.
Yeah,
I mean,
especially if you're going to
it's
keep using them.
unavoidable. It's going to happen, you know?
If you're setting up just a drip system for like a week and you're just using it for when you go on vacation, a clear line won't be that bad because it's not going to have the time for the algae to form. But if you're using it for every watering and throughout the entire growth cycle, I highly recommend going with black polyurethane. And then I use a pond pump. It's a larger pump and it's able to really give enough force in order to water multiple drip emitters. Because if you get a small pump, it's not going to be enough to feed all of the drip emitters. It's not going to be enough gallons per minute or whatever
And
the
then
rating is on those.
and then the pump sits in the reservoir, which also has an air stone in it, correct?
So the reservoir does have an air stone in it. I have an air pump on the outside. I use a commercial grade air pump that just has a manifold with several different 1/4 inch lines that come off onto an air stone that I just toss in. And I mainly use the watering system as needed. I rarely fill it up and leave it on a timer and just let it kind of water itself. I only do that when I do go on trips and vacations. For the most part, I'm filling it up and mixing the water batch fresh every time. So the water is not really sitting around too long, but I do run the air stone while I'm mixing the nutrients and getting the water prepared to be pumped in. So
And then
there is a
do you
oh,
just use
sorry, go ahead.
water straight from the sink or
The water I use for the grow is reverse osmosis water. It's a filtered water that removes, it's a 3-layer filter system that removes everything, literally almost everything. My water goes from like 157 parts per million down to like 14 parts per million. So it has really nothing left in it, strips it of all calcium and iron and boron and anything else that's in your normal tap water. So it's nice to be able to get a clean slate for when you're adding what you need in.
so for somebody who's just starting out, maybe doesn't have access to a reverse osmosis system, is tap water okay? Should they then leave it in a reservoir with an air stone in order to try and help clear some of that chlorine out and whatnot?
Absolutely. Chlorine will gas off over time. You could just leave it normally in a bucket or in a reservoir, just open to the air, and that'll gas off. But to speed up the process and really get it all out of there, you're going to want to throw an air stone in there. And then that'll also help to oxygenate the water and keep it really ready for those roots. And there's no harm in throwing a little oxygen in there. But yes, it will definitely help speed up the dechlorinating process. It won't get rid of chloramines, but it will get rid of chlorine that will gas off. And they say that under pressure in the pipes, that these chlorines are supposed to gas off immediately once they go in your cup of water to drink, that they're only there under pressure. And as soon as they're expelled from the spout, that this chlorine's just supposed to magically gas off right away. I
Yeah,
don't find it to be
that's
the
the
case.
bullshit they like to feed you, huh?
Yeah, I think leaving it out for a little while to help gas it off really does help. And depending on what medium you're doing, if you're doing soil or hydro or cocoa or whatever you're doing, there are definitely benefits to letting it gas off and getting rid of it. And so I definitely recommend it, 100%. Yeah.
So yeah, it pretty much describes the setup for a basic grow, right? A tent, like you said, a basic light. You need the medium you're going to grow in. You need some fans. You need some airflow. And I mean, just about anybody can do it, though. It's really not that hard, right?
So I like to think anybody can grow. It really isn't that hard at all. It does take some time and some energy and some upfront costs, but those returns from what the tent will give you are going to pay for itself almost immediately. And every little bit in your pocket will definitely make a difference later on. It's definitely worth the investment, 100%. And I think anybody can do it. I think anybody can do it, especially the way I've kind of narrowed it down to how I do it. It's definitely doable. And the equipment cost is definitely real. It's definitely a real thing, and there's ways to get around it. You don't have to buy the expensive science LED. You can definitely get a generic light, just but just know what comes with it in the long run as far as customer service and other things. Some companies aren't as good as others. And the thing I really recommend people investing their money in, if you're really gonna put it in one place in the grow, would be the light. The light is the engine. It's what's gonna drive your grow. You're gonna wanna really make sure you have a solid light, and that'll really feed it really well.
Yeah, I personally do think it is a little bit of a balance though, because the better light you get, like the more wattage, the hotter it's going to be, the more airflow you need, so on and so forth. So, yeah, definitely, temperature and humidity are a very real thing too. Mold is a real issue, and when it hits your plants, it kills everything. So you don't, definitely want to make sure you have that airflow in there as well for those reasons.
Yeah, yeah. As far as the exhaust fans, I feel like the 4-inch exhaust fan is good enough for the 2x4, and the 6-inch is good enough for the 4x4. I do run an additional booster fan on my 4x4. It's a 6-inch rack seal from AC Infinity, and it's a pretty cheap one, but it's just to help that little extra airflow if the tent got a little too crowded and needs just a little help cleaning out that humidity, because you're absolutely right, that humidity is a killer, and especially in the summertime and the relative humidity outside is rough, it's even harder to keep it down. And mold is real. Mold is a real thing, and it can definitely be a killer in the grow, especially when you're mid-flower or end of flower and you're running into those problems. It can be pretty heartbreaking. Pretty heartbreaking, yeah.
Yeah, I knew somebody who once told me that they were running a humidifier in their tent, and I'm like, oh man, that's a bad idea. And they're like, no, but it helps during veg, and it's like, okay, okay, like if you're gonna do it right, I'm sure it has its benefits, but he didn't do it right, so it killed his entire tent.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, so you got
Yeesh.
to be careful. You got to be careful.
So there's definitely a sweet spot. I've in our location, I've never really felt the need for adding humidity. I always feel like the plants are transpiring enough, except for maybe when they're like really young and they don't have enough foliage to really transpire. But as soon as they hit like mid-veg, they're really good. Like they're giving off enough water to manage the humidity. And really a dehumidifier is another really vital piece of equipment in the grow that is necessary, in my opinion, to be able to control what I like to call the lung room. And the lung room is the room that your tent sits in. And then the lung room air is what the tent draws in from the exhaust at the bottom of the tent through the passive air intake in order to regulate temperature and humidity throughout the tent. And the room that the tent sits in is almost as important as the environment within the tent. And because you're not going to be able to control the environment within the tent if your lung room is out of whack. So you got to make sure that the room is set up for what you're doing, you know?
The first thing you wind up having to do is germinate a seed. Can you tell us about the germination process?
Absolutely. So once you got your tent all set up, you got your whole thing, you're getting excited, you're like, all right, man, here we go. Um, so really your options for getting a seed can be from anywhere. It can be from something you've gotten in the past through some medical flowers you've gotten from somebody, or wherever it may be.
It could be from
I
the In-Tents Genetix Growers Community Facebook page giveaway weekly. It could be from there.
it could totally be from there. And if you were one of the lucky winners, congratulations to you. That's awesome. But they could be from anywhere. They could be from anywhere. I really like getting random gifts from people, and who knows what they are, and those that's the most fun for me. I like the surprise, I like the hunt, I like to see what's there. and and that's really what it is for me. So I will take the seeds, and I get a shot glass, clean shot glass. You can use plastic, glass, whatever you want. And I use some of the RO water, so I use the filtered water. I fill it up about halfway, and then I pretty much just toss the seeds right in. I give them a nice soak for about 16 to 18 hours, somewhere in that range. You really don't want to let them go too long. And after the first few hours of them being in the water, they'll float. They should float at first. If they sink right away, that means there's some kind of break in the shell of the seed. So they shouldn't sink right away. That means that seed might be a dud, right? So you drop your seeds in the water, and then I let them sit for about 2 hours. Then I'll go in there and I'll give them a little poke, and I'll just poke them down, and then they'll sink all the way to the bottom. That way I know they've started to absorb the water, right? And then I'll let them sit for about another, up to that 16-hour mark. And then I pretty much should be able to see them starting to crack open, and a tail should be starting to emerge. And even if there isn't a tail or it hasn't cracked, it still has started the germination process of of taking in the water and starting to grow. So usually you want to leave the shot glass in a location that's going to be dark and warm to start the process. Usually a high up cabinet in your kitchen, maybe above your refrigerator or above your stove or oven, because the refrigerator has heat coming off of it and will kind of warm up the cabinets above it to create this nice dark warm box for germinating. So I'll keep them up there, and that's kind of where I like to put them. I mean, you can put them anywhere as long as you can put them above your tent in the room. As long as it's dark and warm, that's all they really need. And then the bit of water to get them going. And then once they've cracked, then I like to take a solo cup, fill it with a clear solo cup so that you can easily check the roots throughout the process of it being a seedling. And and then that way you kind of can get a better idea when to transplant instead of guessing. But
Oh, that's very smart. I never
so
thought of that.
so clear solo cup inside of a regular solo cup, and then you want to get your soil ready. You can use a basic soil or something that isn't too hot. You don't really want soil that's fully amended. You could totally use it and it might work okay, but you also might run into problems. So something like a Happy Frog soil or something like a Roots Organic, stuff like a Strawberry Fields or even an Ocean Forest might have a little bit too much amendments already pre-mixed in, and it might be a little too hot for that seedling. But those other soils should be plenty fine to get going. And then once the plant has gotten going, you can then put it into a more heavily amended soil, and then it could eat properly. But really, what I like to do is take the seed, poke down with like the back of a pen and create a small dimple into the soil. The soil should be moist, but not soaking wet. You should be able to squeeze the soil and see barely a drop of water come out. And then when you open your hand, it should stay clumped together. And then you can kind of break it up in between your fingers, and it should break up very easily. It shouldn't clump together and stay really hard. That means that your configuration of soil or how they mix the soil might have too much clay or too much worm castings or some kind of dense matter holding it all together, or it might just be too wet. So I really like to keep an airy kind of soil, kind of keep it really light and able f- able for the roots to kind of just go throughout it very easily. So fill up a cup about 3/4 of the way up, and then make a small dimple with the back of a pen or pencil, and then I'll pour from the shot glass the water, because as the seeds are starting to sprout and crack open, they're releasing some enzymes to get the things going, right? So you want to use those enzymes. You could just dump them out onto a paper cloth and then pick them up by a tweezer and put them in. but why not use that water, right? So I dump a little bit of that water in each of the dimples, so it has a nice wet spot for where you're going to put the seed. And then I'll take a toothpick or something in order to slide the seed out of the shot glass and let it fall directly into the dimple. Then I'll gently cover it over and spray it a few times with a water bottle and then cover it up with a plastic baggie. So it creates this incubator where it traps in the heat and the moisture so that it has everything it needs for the seed to germinate.
Do
And
you
within 2 to 3, sorry,
do
go ahead.
you want the seed to be positioned a certain way?
So yes and no. A lot of people will say you're going to want the pointed end. When you look at a seed, on one side it'll have almost like a dimple where the seed was attached, and then the other side comes to a point. And a lot of times they say what you want to do is put the point down so that when the seed starts to come up and emerge, it has an easier time shedding the shell and it kind of as it merges through the soil, it'll pull off the seed shell. And that really is, I yes and no. I don't really find it's super beneficial or like you have to do it. I mean, usually when the seeds are healthy and they're fresh, I mean, you could put them in there any way you want. Those things are going to sprout, you know. Um, if it's an older seed or something you're a little bit worried about, yeah, you could take the extra second or two to position it properly. But as soon as you cover it up and start watering it or whatever, that seed's going to roll around in the dirt probably. It's probably not going to stay completely fixed to how you set it into the soil. So if it's 100% necessary in position, not really, not really. Um, and if it's upside down, sometimes what can happen is that the taproot will emerge and it'll be kind of like growing upside down, which I don't really find happens all too often. That really mostly happens when you plant them too shallow. When you plant a seed too shallow, that can definitely happen. And all you got to do is spin it around, add a little bit more soil, cover up that root, and it should be fine. But really, once it's covered up with the plastic baggie, you're going to want to give it that 2 to 3 days, give it the time for it to emerge. And as soon as it does emerge, you want to check it out. You want to make sure that seed casing did fall off. If that seed casing is still on it, it can be a problem. You want those initial leaves, the starter leaves, to start receiving light as soon as possible. If
So
they're trapped in that seed shell, they could die
so
and
for
dampen
those
off real quick.
so what is the reason for putting the plastic bag over it? And during those 2 3 days, you do want them under the light, correct?
Yes, so for the first 2 to 3 days, you do want that plastic bag on there, and it might not even be 2 to 3 days. It might even be just one day, and it might pop out. All it does is it creates a retention layer for the heat. As the light penetrates into the cup, it'll trap the heat from the light in there and create a greenhouse effect where it'll stay very warm. And then also, the moisture will not be able to dry out very quickly if it's covered with a plastic bag. It'll retain that moisture in there and it'll help the seed to stay nice and moist because if the seed dries out during the germination process, it can also be an issue and have it die off. So you want to keep it moist until it emerges. And then the second it emerges, the main thing you want to be, I'm sorry, what was the other question? Was that, did I cover
Yeah, you did. Just you want it under the light for those 2 3 days. So as soon as you
the
get it in the
light?
cup,
Yeah.
you put it, in the tent with the light ready to go, right?
So the light I run for 24 hours. I want to create this warm environment for the seedling to emerge into. I don't want it shutting off for 6 hours for no reason, and then it gets all cold in the tent that they're in or wherever you have them, and it's messing with it, right? It's all about maintaining the perfect environment for the plant. You want to really set them up for success by giving them what they need when they need it. And when they're in that germination stage, they need almost 100% moisture or 90% humidity, right? You really want it super moist in there so that that shell stays nice and soft and they're able to really slip right out of it. Because if that shell gets really hard and dries out, it can be hard for them to emerge out of there. And what ends up happening is you have to go in there with a pair of tweezers and slightly squeeze it on the side and slowly remove it and play some surgery without ripping off the head. And trust me,
Yeah.
I've ripped off several heads. It has definitely happened. And it is really about just getting that shell off. And the second it comes off, you could see those leaves start to open up and start taking in the energy and really start to open up and show their first true leaves. And
Yeah, I mean that
the
process,
light,
it's really like trying to remove an eggshell off a little baby chicken's head. It is very delicate. You're like, "Oh, man."
super delicate. And when you're running with expensive, expensive bird seeds and you can't waste them and you really want to make sure everyone gets
Bird
through.
seeds.
Yeah, you really want to make sure everyone makes it, especially when you're paying so much for these seeds. So you're gonna want to even remove that shell, but in the other end of that is if you don't remove the shell, they die. So you're gonna want to remove the shell. So if you rip off the head, it's gonna die anyways. I'm always
Yeah,
super
that's
impatient
that's
though.
why that's
You
why
can
ideally you just want the environment to be in a spot for where the natural um progression can take place on its own.
Yeah, if you plant it deep enough, and I don't mean go crazy and plant it, you know, 3 inches or 2 inches deep. I'm talking like half an inch. You know what I mean? Half an inch to 3/4 of an inch down. And that should be enough soil between the surface and where you planted it for that shell of the seed to be removed as it sprouts. So that should be more than enough space. And oftentimes they don't just come off. And I've noticed I've popped a lot of seeds and they don't always come off. And it is very important to remove them. And I've played surgery plenty of times. It's definitely worth doing. I've saved tons of plants that shouldn't have made it because they weren't strong enough to emerge from the shell. And those have been some of the winners. At the end of the day, some of the more finicky plants can really produce some amazing flowers. So don't waste any of them. Always give them the best chance for success. And that's really what you're trying to do. Just be a good steward to the plant and really just give it everything it needs and take it where it needs to go. And that's really just what I do to start the plant. And then as soon as it emerges, as soon as that shell's off and it's starting to open those leaves, you remove the plastic bag. And technically that's day one of veg.
You love to do the giveaways on Facebook and whatnot, and so a lot of people out there have a chance to be able to experience your product and whatnot. So I wanted to ask you about a specific strain that I personally have loved in the past. I wanted you to talk about the 708 for me and how that strain came about, and then the qualities of that strain in itself throughout the grow, at the end of the grow, and maybe even some of the other strains that have that you've crossbred from that initial 708 plant that people might have around today.
Absolutely. The 708 has been a staple in my garden for quite some time now. Um, really enjoy the 708 for multiple reasons. It's definitely a plant that's great for its trichome. Its trichome of the plant is very thick, so it's easily collected to make concentrates with and is great for that. I really found the plant by mistake. I thought I had planted something else, and when I went to go check the seeds that I had popped, I realized that I didn't pop the ones that I thought I had popped. So, um, it really was a surprise when it came through. I thought it was gonna be something else, and I had 3 different ones that were really just some random seeds, and that's what I say, I love the hunt. I love popping random old seeds and random new seeds or any seeds, but the 708 was a random seed, and it was random number 3.
How
And
how old do you think that seed was?
oh man, I have no idea. I would guess, I would say back from when we first started indulging for sure. Back in the day,
So
I
what?
would say at least
15
10,
plus? Wow.
15 years. Yeah, 15 or maybe, yeah, 15 or so years ago. And it's really doesn't have any of these new age influences in it. It's very unique as far as its terpene profile. It's very floral. It's got a floral kind of terpene profile and a very like grapey, berryish profile as well. But really, it comes out very strong once it's made into a concentrate. When it's in its flower form, it's very hard to even pick up a smell on it. It's until you take the flower and crack open the trichomes with your fingers, really kind of just break them up with your fingers, that the smell emerges. It's similar to like garlic. It gets stronger as you break it up. As you start mashing that garlic, the smells really start to come out, Um, so it's that which I really liked about it. And I liked it so much because it would produce so much um, in the trichome department, and it would be very easily collected. And it just made the most beautiful concentrates, great smell, great effect, great indica leaning effects, very short, squat plant, doesn't stretch very much, does great in our area, have grown it outside in our area in the Midwest a few times now, and has gotten to a harvest every time without issue. So really true to its name in the 708 area code, it does do well. So that's very cool. Um, I've mixed it in every breeding round I've done so far, just because it is the highest producer percentage wise in collecting for concentrates compared to anything I've ran to this day, which is crazy to think. And I've ran a lot of stuff and nothing has dumped like that strain. So I've kept it
So,
around. I still go. Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say. So, what are some of the offsprings that came from that?
So every season, right? So season 1 was the Midwest Frost. I mixed it with the pink animal crackers and got the Midwest Frost. The Midwest Frost was a beautiful plant. It had more of the sweetness, terpene profile from the pink animal crackers, and it really added very nicely with the berry kind of flavoring from the 708. So it's this even sweeter berry and really enjoyed it. It had almost a creaminess to it as well. So really enjoyed that cross. And that one hasn't been around for quite some time, but I'm sure she'll reemerge eventually. And then in season 2, I crossed it with the Alien Wedding and I produced the Stranger's Candy. And with the Alien Wedding, it brought this funk, this like gassy funk to all the crosses. And with that, it brought this berry funk. It was very interesting and complex terpene profile. And I really enjoyed that as well. But it wasn't dumping as well as the Midwest Frost did and as the 708 did. Something from that Alien Wedding was a little greasy, and these days I prefer the greasiness, but it still did well. It just didn't do as well as the others. And then in season 3, most recently, I crossed it with the Mountain Apple, and it was so small and produced such a small number of seeds that they probably won't be released. I say probably, but who knows? Who knows? But I do have a very, very limited personal quantity of those that will only be going to close people I know or things like that. Or
Did you
and that
uh,
that's
did you
that's
name
all
them?
for that one. I'm sorry.
Did you name that one?
That one I was gonna call the Seven Summits, and we haven't made that official yet or anything, but it was gonna be called the Seven Summits with the Mountain Apple and the 708 cross. Haven't have and the Seven Summits are the highest peaks in the world, right? The 7 highest mountains in the world. So that's why I was going to call it the 7 summits.
Very, very creative, my friend. Well, that's awesome, man. Um,
And then, yes, she will be brought back in season 4, the upcoming season 4, with the Apple Mac will be the stud male for that upcoming season. But that's more to come eventually. Yes.
all right. Well, thank you so much for your time tonight, and yeah, I think we got a lot of good quality content down, so there should be plenty to go off of. So I'm gonna head and just end the recording, unless you want to say something or maybe give a little promo to the Facebook page.
Yeah, definitely would love to give a shout out to um, all the followers on Facebook, everybody who's been participating in the giveaways. It really does mean the world to me to have everybody participating and growing out these genetics. I can't do it all myself. It is really nice. The space is just too limited. And it really is the best seeing the outcome and seeing what people are really getting from the seeds, and what
And
we can really find as a community. And that's what's really important.
and that Facebook page is.
The Facebook page is In-Tents Genetix Growers Community. And yes, please join. The giveaways are weekly and they're free. And I pick 3 people who have never won before and 3 people who have won before. And yeah, I highly recommend getting your name up on the wheel. What's happening, everybody? I like to think anybody can grow. It really isn't that hard at all. All the followers on Facebook, everybody who's been participating in the giveaways, it really does mean the world to me. What's happening, everybody? I like to think anybody can grow. It really isn't that hard at all. All the followers on Facebook, everybody who's been participating in the giveaways, it really does mean the world to me.